Okay, better late than never. Let's get started tonight. Thursday night class. This is before Purim. Purim is a time in which it says a person has to become intoxicated on Purim until Adalo Yoda, until he doesn't know. So I already fulfilled that because I don't know the discourse that I'm teaching today. So I'm teaching from I don't know place, not from an I know place. But that's good. Maybe something much better is going to come out from the I don't know than from the know. It's exciting to learn things you don't know because then you're getting out of your space. You're going into a whole new realm. At this point, I don't feel like I know this mimer. I'm determined to teach Torah because I want to finish the book. I just have a few discourses left, like altogether, like 5-6 discourses in the whole book. So this is a discourse in Megillah Esther, on the Megillah in the back and the end of Torah. It's on page 192 would be the English side, but actually, not the English, the one side of Torah the back side of every page. In the Hebrew books, you start the opposite way than you start from an English, from a secular book. Hebrew books, you always start from which side? From the right side. You go towards the left. Other books, you start from the left, you're going to the right. So in the back of each page, there's numbers. On the front side of each page are Hebrew alphabet for which page it is. And they're not equal. They don't work together. This is, right, they're not like the same number. It's a whole different count. Why it is that way, that's the way it is. Adds extra confusion. So the book of Torah, this discourse is on page Tzadik Zayin. Tzadik Zayin is number 97. First column. It's an explanation. It's called Biur al Anal. It's an explanation. Al Anal means on what was mentioned earlier, which is the discourse of the Kibbel on page 192, page before that, which starts with the words V'Kibbel HaYehudim Asher Shechelu Lasos. The Jewish people accepted that which they begun to do. Now, we already discussed Monday night this past week the whole concept that we know that the Purim was the completion of the receiving of the Torah. And this week we had a whole long discussion of why that was. I gave over a Torah from Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berditch. We explained how by the giving of the Torah, the Jews were in a very, very, very elevated and a very transcendental state. They had a very expansive understanding. Just by coming to the mountain, they were swept up into a very, very, they were elevated to a very, very high place. And therefore, if they accepted the Torah then, that did not mean that they were accepting the Torah when their feet, when they had their boots on the ground. But on Purim, they were able to accept it, and only that's why God had to force it upon them, so that they can keep the Torah even when they're not feeling so spiritual. We also learned on Monday that not just regarding the Jewish people not being so spiritual, the world itself was a very miraculous world. They were elevated and the world was elevated. And Hashem wanted to ensure that they're going to keep the Torah even when they are grounded and when the world is grounded. In other words, a world that's a natural world. And people that are a natural people with all the limitations of vision and yet, and that's the story of Purim. We discussed that in the story of Purim, God became visible in the natural. And in the normal world, not in the crazy world, in the very natural, regular, everyday world, Hashem became visible. And as a result of that, the people were able to commit to God even while they were living a natural, normal, down-to-earth existence. That's what we learned on Monday. Now we're going to learn a deeper explanation on why the conclusion of the giving of the Torah was on Purim. 1,000 years it took until the Jews were able to fully accept the Torah. Basically, now we're going to learn that there is a certain, in order for the Torah to manifest into this world, there has to be a certain zichuch, there has to be a certain purification in the world for the, what does it mean to have Torah in the world? To have Torah in the world basically means that the world becomes divine. That's what it means. Learning Torah and doing mitzvahs means acting divine, which means that when we're learning, we're engaged in a mitzvah, when we're studying Torah, we are at that moment embodying the divine. We're facilitating the divine. Our bodies, our hands, our limbs, our feet, our spiritual faculties, our soul is facilitating a presence of God, the Shekhinah and Or Ein Sof, not just the Shekhinah, the Or Ein Sof, the Infinite One is flowing through us and within us when we do a mitzvah and when we study Torah. For that to happen down here in the realms of creation, therefore Torah and mitzvahs, its origins are really in the supernal world. When we say supernal world, we mean way above angels and way above the spiritual heights. We're talking about the realms of the pure divine. In Atzilus, in the world of emanation, where there is only God. So over there, the Torah and mitzvot are the manifestation, how God manifests himself in those worlds. That's why the Torah and mitzvahs are called the limbs of the king. But to translate that down here into a world of limitation, a world of finite, and all the way down into the real finite world, which is our mitigated existence, our tiny little existence, that our actions should embody these super mega powerful infinite energies, it in it of itself is so wild, is so crazy. But more than that, there's another element, and that is that the world, the physical world down here below, is filled with evil. It's filled with darkness. It's filled with klipa. It's filled with elements and powers that are antithetical to holiness and godliness. So how can you get God to move into the slums? That's the question. How can the physical, which is so riddled with unholiness, since the sin of the tree of knowledge, there became a massive mixture of good and bad, and klipa became embedded into everything. So therefore we're saying that the world needed a certain purification. That's why Torah could not be given immediately. They sinned, and then the world plunged into darkness. It took 2,000 years of rectification. And during this time, the world became even more polluted. But on a deeper level, there was a rectification taking place through the powerful, intense purifications that were happening through the flood, which was the first stage of purification. And then primarily through the righteous individuals, Abraham, our patriarchs and matriarchs, the tribes, and then the 70 souls that went down to Egypt. And the final rectification, purification, and purging, that's what it needed. The world needed purging for it to be ready to manifest. Godliness can manifest down here below. And that main purge happened where? When they were in Egypt, when the Jewish people were in Egypt. The suffering, the immense pain and suffering of the exile brought about this purification, which readied the world to now be ready to receive such godly light. However, the purification of the world by the giving of the Torah was not to the fullest. And therefore, when the Jews received the Torah and therefore were given the ability to act, to live godly lives, it didn't really stick to them completely. They were on and off. He used the term that the Alter Rebbe uses in this discourse. I'm going to jump to the little parts that I hopefully understand a little bit, so I can pretend that I know something. In the discourse, there's a line here that's very, very beautiful. He says, "Ubematan Torah, hoyrak hascholas." I'm reading from further in the discourse. By the giving of the Torah was only the beginning of Tikkun Hakaylim, to rectify the vessels. The physical world should be a rectified vessel, that in it should be able to be enclosed divinity. Right? Atzilus, the world of emanation, is already a rectified vessel. It's from the very get-go, it is purely godly. There's no impurity and imperfection in it. But when you take it down another 3 notches, take it down into the world of creation, which is so holy and so spiritual, but still a creation. And then take it down to the next realm of existence, which is the world of formation. And then bring it all the way down to the world of completion, the world of the material, physical world. And in the world of completion, there's two levels. There's the spiritual world of completion, and there's the physical world of completion. To bring it literally into the physical world, that the human hand, literally the human arm that is giving tzedakah, that is giving charity, should be a funnel for God's infinite kindness, for God's hand, and that your hand is no more your hand. It's just a channel for Hashem's hand coming through your hand, my hand, when we're doing charity. For that to happen, there needed to be what we call Tikkun Hakaylim. The vessels needed to be rectified. So he says, by the giving of the Torah, the condition of the world was that it was only haschalas Tikkun Hakaylim. It was only the beginning of the rectification of the vessels. And because the vessels were only partially rectified, so the download speed of the divine energy was also poor. So it's almost like the mitzvahs that they were doing in the early time, in the early days, was, as the words he uses over here, Inyan ma'at ma'at agarshenu. It's like God tells the Jewish people when they're going into the land of Israel, Hashem says to them, and they're taking a land that was once the land of the most corrupted society, corrupted pagan cultures, and they had to turn it into a holy land. So God tells the Jewish people, and the fact that it was so unholy was also expressed itself in the fact that there were a lot of wild beasts in the land. Israel was roaming around with there was a lot of wild beasts in the land. That's what it seems from the verse. So God says, I am not going to chase them out right away. I'm not going to chase the nations out right away. No, I'm mixing it up. I'm sorry, I misquoted. The verse says, I'm not going to chase the bad guys out right away because you are not large enough as a people to fill the entire land. Because you're not populated enough. Let's say in the land of the seven nations were living maybe, let's say, 15 million people. The Jewish people, when they were coming into the land of Israel, were only 2 million people. So if God was going to clear out the entire place and all the seven nations would have been immediately banished, so there would be a lot of empty land in the land of Israel, and then it would fill with wild beasts. So Hashem says, Ma'at ma'at agarshenu. Don't expect you to have the full takeover immediately. I'm going to do it, but I'm intentionally clearing out the land of Israel from the ancient inhabitants. I'm doing it slowly so that you should fully be able to take the land, and you'll populate and take the land. This is a verse 2 weeks ago, Parshas Mishpatim. It said that verse. So he uses that idea that just like in the land of that was the physical story, but spiritually it also means that it's that God saying that your holiness is not yet fully developed. You need to increase your holiness. You need to develop yourself more so that you can take over the land, and there won't be any wild beasts over there. Which means there won't be any negativity over there. You'll be able to implement godliness without it being, overrun by the klippas that are there. You see, it's always very, very dangerous. This is a major theme over here in the discourse. It's a very irresponsible and reckless thing to bring intense divine energies in when there can be those who will usurp it and use it in a negative way. Because then it will give to the forces of darkness incredible, unrestricted and unlimited powers. And that's dangerous. When bad guys get a hold of intense energy, very dangerous. That was the reason why Hashem protected the tree of life. God surrounded the tree of life with these angelic beings, which are called like the fiery sword, the flame of the fiery sword which God put by the entrance to the tree of to the Garden of Eden. Because why was God so worried that Adam and Eve will eat from that tree of life? Let them eat from the tree of life; they'll live. So we learned about that the reason Hashem did that was because since Adam and Eve, Adam and Chava, incorporated within themselves klipa, a lot of unholiness, so they kind of downloaded a virus into their psyche. Now if they can eat from the tree of life, the virus itself is going to then also eat from the tree of life, and then that virus would become eternal. It would live forever. They would live forever, and the evil inclination would live forever. But that's not, God doesn't want that to happen. He wants the intention of creation is the evil inclination should expire, and all unholiness should expire. So whenever we draw down higher godly energies, there has to be an assurance that there is a clean place for it to come down. If the place is filthy and dirty, then the bacteria can live off this very, very, very great influx of energy, and that is extremely dangerous. So that's why he says, by the giving of the Torah, the world was partially ready, the vessels were partially rectified, so the light came down, but only ma'at, only a little bit agar shenem, he says, similar to that. And where do you see that and therefore the Torah didn't really fully click and fully register, if you can say, in the Jewish people. It remained a little bit like loose. It wasn't fully, didn't really take hold of them. And as he gives a proof, the Jewish people were not in a state of perfection. If you read the book of Shoftim, which is the book of Judges, you see a people that are struggling with their moral selves. The people are very, very fluctuating. There are moments when they are very high and devoted and dedicated to God, and there are moments that they fall very low and very into idol worship and into all kinds of other depravities. Like we saw a couple of months ago, we were learning the story of the concubine of Pledge, but give that horrible story. So you see that there was a lot of garbage. There was a lot of ups and downs because this godly life had not yet fully settled in them. By the story of Purim, there was something that happened during the pre-Purim that caused that they accelerated in a very short period of time. They accelerated the purification. The people reached a level of immense purification very, very quickly. And it has to do a lot with the state of the people during the entire year when there was a threat of annihilation on their heads. During that time, the Jewish people, as an entire people, were in a state of complete devotion to God, so much so that they had a chance to save their lives by renouncing their Judaism. They could have renounced their connection to God and assimilated into the Persian society, and then they would have. But no one even had a thought to do that. Millions of people stood ready. Sacrifice of all the people caused such a purification in the world and such a purification in their bodies that right now the Torah was now ready to fully take hold, to fully manifest in their bodies and in the physical world. And therefore, that's what the meaning is, that after Purim, we completely received the Torah. It rings a little bit with the Monday class, because the Monday class we also spoke that through the Megillah, there was a purification of all the pollutants in the natural world. Remember we learned that nature itself became purified. We spoke about the world becoming clean and crystal and crisp, like a blue sky after the rains. All the pollutants are gone. So there is that purification that happens through reading the Megillah, through the story of Purim. It's similar to that in this idea that there was a certain completion of the tikkun of the world, which as a result of that, godliness can now safely manifest. And it will not be, its powerful energies will not be misused by Klippa because we've cleansed a lot of Klippa out. So the Klippa became much weaker. Amalek was destroyed. Haman, his bunch of cronies, and all of these guys, anti-Semites, were wiped off. And all of that brought about that after that, the coast was clear for a full and powerful manifestation of the divine down here on earth. That through us and in us, and even into the materials of the world, we can implement the divine, which is Torah and Mitzvahs. That is what this discourse is going to explain. Now, I'm going to say something interesting. A lot of the discourse, which is the part that I'm not getting yet, which I'm struggling with, is he's going to explain that since by Purim was phase 2 of the giving of the Torah, it's for that reason that we have a very interesting verse that Achashverosh, who's the king, the Persian king then, says to Haman, or the opposite. Haman says to Achashverosh, Haman says to Achashverosh. What does Haman say? Haman is the bad guy, right? He's the one who schemes up this whole plan to wipe out the Jewish people. When Achashverosh says to him, what do you suggest should be done to someone who the king values, the king wants to honor, because that the king had heard that night, he couldn't sleep, he had a sleepless night, and it was read before him, the Chronicles, the book of, and over there it was told to him that Mordechai saved his life. When he heard that, and Haman came to, at that moment, to ask the king to hang Mordechai on the gallows that he had prepared for him, it was just at the right moment. And the king was becoming very nervous about him and about Haman, because he started getting the sense that Haman is plotting to assassinate him. So at that moment, he asked Haman, what would you say should be done? And Haman, because he was so arrogant, as the verse says, thought that the king was talking about him. And he says, the one that the king wants to honor, you should bring the garment that the king wore on the day of his coronation, and the horse that the king rode upon on the day of his coronation, and dress this individual up with the garment and with the crown, and put him on the. So if the king had any thoughts, if Haman has in his mind thoughts of being king and overtaking the kingdom, he had now his validation. But the king tells him to go to take Mordechai, the Jew, and dress him like this and parade him around town. That's the story. Now, as we saw last week, the Megillah, when we read the whole thing about this Haggai and the whole story with the women's court, we realized that the Megillah has got a much higher story. If Achashverosh is the king, Achashverosh the king is referring to God, like we learned last week. So this whole story about bringing the horse and the garment that the king wore, what is that referring to? What's the deeper story? It means like this: the day God became king over the world was the day of the giving of the Torah. So when we say bring the horses and bring the garment that the king wore when he was coronated, referring to the day that God is coronated on the world, because God didn't have a nation that was devoted to his will and to serving him until the giving of the Torah. That's when we accepted his kingship. We became his servants, his subjects, and God's empire in the world, God's kingdom in the world was initiated. When Mashiach comes, it's going to be in its full completion, because it's not just going to be over the Jewish people, it's going to be all over all of mankind. But at Sinai, it was over Israel. Now, since this is the completion of the giving of the Torah, so we have to have the same garment and the same horse. So where do we find by the giving of the Torah that God was riding on a horse? Well, it says in the verse, Kisir kaval susecha, when you came riding on your horses, Markavaisecha Yeshua, your chariots of salvation. And over here, the main bulk of the discourse goes on to explain what's the function of the supernal horse by the giving of the Torah, and why by Purim we got to bring out the horses again. It's so phenomenal. This is where I was going, that every discourse we're learning this year is about horses. Do you realize that? The last few months. And I feel like I don't understand this discourse. So I thought to myself, maybe I need to go horseback riding this week. So if I have a better understanding on the discourse next week, I'll let you know. If sometime, or maybe on Purim, I'll get myself a nice, big, tall horse and run around town riding on the horse. That'll be cool. And maybe by riding on the horse, it will clarify and I'll get to understand the concept of the supernal horse. But the medium, the main idea, the outline of the discourse is that since Purim is phase 2 of the giving of the Torah, it needs to be enacted in the same way the first time it was done, 1,000 years earlier, where there was a garment, and the garment where the king dresses himself, and the horse that the king is riding on. So we find that Haman is suggesting to bring the same thing. So you have to say that even though Haman is talking and he's thinking about his own honor, through him and in his words were embedded the deeper, higher godly story that the Torah is now about to come to the world. And for that, we need to prepare the supernal horse to help facilitate the drawing of godliness down to the world, which will then become the next level of observance of mitzvahs, of Torah and mitzvahs. That's the idea. Now everybody can go home already. Once we learned that, now we can go and learn. Biur now, let's learn inside. Inyan, Hinei. So the first paragraph, thank God, is very learnable, very understandable. It's the second paragraph where he starts talking about the horses that I am pretty much confused. So let's see, maybe we'll leave that for next week. We'll just learn this part, but as long as I gave the outline, so you're getting the idea. Let's read. Hinei, for behold, Inyan Kayeim Avraham Avinu, Olav Shalom Kol HaTorah actually nitna. See, the beginning of the original discourse, remember I said this, we said earlier that this discourse is an explanation on the discourse before this. Over there in that discourse, which is the main discourse, here it's again the explanation, he's explaining this idea that by Purim it was a completion of the giving of the Torah. We accepted the Torah that we've. So now, by the way, I'm going to, 1 second, going back to what we were talking earlier. It doesn't say God gave the Torah on Purim. It says we completed our Kabbalah. Kabbalah means our recipients. As we were able, as we said, because we purified the vessels, we were now able to really assimilate it. It was able to come in deeply inside of us so that we can start becoming divine beings. Because again, observance of Torah and mitzvahs, living the life of Torah and mitzvahs, makes a person be a divine being. When Mashiach comes and the Torah and mitzvahs are completely integrated and assimilated into every fiber of our being, it says the angels will say to the righteous people, to the tzaddikim, and this is referring to all those who kept mitzvot, are tzaddikim, they're going to say to every single one, holy, holy, holy is God of hosts. And what does it mean when angels say holy? When they're saying holy, it means, amazing thing, when they're saying holy to God, what do they want? They just want to praise God? That's nice, but they want more. They recognize God transcends them. That's what holiness means. Holiness means removed, above, beyond. They recognize God transcends them, and they want to draw down of that transcendental light into that should be infused in them. So they want some of the transcendence to manifest in them so that they too will now have of the higher light. And that's what it means when they say holy, holy, holy. They're downloading holiness. So who are they downloading holiness from? From when the world was created until now. From who are they downloading holiness from? They're downloading it from God. And watch the amazing thing. When Mashiach will come, that means where are they downloading it? From above heaven. The heavens above are trying to download holiness from what is beyond heaven. That means all the angels are turning upward with their eyes up. From heaven, they're looking upward to a place where they can download that holiness. And when Mashiach will come, they will look down to earth and they will upload holiness, download holiness. They're going to say to the Jewish people down here below, enclosed in bodies, holy, holy, holy. By saying holy, holy, they will be uploading holiness, because the essence of holiness is going to manifest down here in bodies. What does that mean? Only God is holy. Well, God will no more be above the world. God will be manifest in the physical world. And from the physical world, all holiness, all spiritual enlightenment, and godly infusion will be pumped up to heaven from earth, because earth will be infinitely holier than heaven. And those who kept mitzvot, which are va'amech kulam tzadikim, all of your people are all fully righteous, which means as a result of the observance of mitzvahs, into our 248 limb physical body will be vested the 248 limbs of God through the mitzvot, which are 248 mitzvot, and from here will be the essence of all holiness. So once we get that, but again, in order for this to happen, it had to first click, and it has to first be, the body, the physical needs to be ready for it. And it came in two stages. The giving of the Torah, which was one state, and the next state was the story of Purim. Now, in the main discourse, he began with a question. In order to appreciate and understand why it took till Purim, in order to be able to get there, why did it take 1,000 years? Why couldn't they immediately get it? He says, because we first need to understand, what does it mean, the giving of the Torah? What really happened? What do you mean, what really happened? God gave us the Torah. So he says, but not so. We know that the sages tell us that Abraham kept the Torah before it was given. Avraham kept the entire Torah before this. We also made mention on Monday night. Monday night, we explained from Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Berditchev, was because Avraham was so sensitive to his soul. So he knew what is the nourishment and what his soul needs to eat. So he understood and appreciated every mitzvah from within his soul. It was natural to him. Here he's going to give a little bit of a different explanation to the same idea of why Avraham was able to observe the Torah before it was given. He's going to show us how that is an enormous greatness of Avraham, which indicates what a powerful soul he was, that he was able to achieve the Torah and mitzvahs before they were given. But at the same time, he's going to turn around and he's going to show how lacking Avram's Torah and mitzvahs was. On the one hand, he was able to do it all without the physical mitzvahs that were given to us by the giving of the Torah. He was able to do it, whatever the Torah is, which is a connection to the divine, he was able to establish it from within himself without the need of physical commandments. But on the other hand, he's going to show us how incomparably weaker Abraham's mitzvahs were to our mitzvahs, that we do in a physical form. Once will he appreciate how awesomely potent and powerful our mitzvot are, in what sense? In manifesting the divine, in capturing God and channeling God, that our channels are so much more potent and powerful than Abraham's channels. Not because of who we are, but because whose children we were, his children, and the Torah was given to us. Then we'll appreciate and understand what happened by the giving of the Torah. And then we understand why it took time. Why this is not something that should happen like that. It's basically the concept we spoke earlier, the idea of Tikkun of the Hakaylim. Because Avraham Avinu, by his mitzvahs, he was not drawing the godliness into physical vessels. He was connecting his soul to the divine, but he wasn't drawing it into physical vessels. So the physical did not need such purification yet for his type of observance. But there is something so much greater when God manifests in physical vessels. Not only that it's even affecting the physical, but that it's much higher and much potent divine light. When it's coming down into physicality, which should really have the opposite of effect, it should be much weaker. Turns out it's the opposite. It's the most potent form of channeling the divine when we can do it, when we could do it in the physical. So there's something awesome about doing it in the physical. But to do it in the physical takes a certain purification of the physical, which that level of purification was achieved by the giving of the Torah only to a certain degree and was greatly enhanced by the Purim story. So therefore, he's first going to give us a whole explanation of what kind of service Abraham did. What was his spirituality? What was his connection to the Torah and the Mitzvahs? Then he's going to explain the quality of what happened by the giving of the Torah. Then we'll understand the novelty of Purim. That's how the discourse is structured. Okay, so now we're ready to learn. Hinei, Inyan Kayeim Avraham Avinu kol Torah achlei nitna. Concept that Abraham kept the entire Torah. Avraham, our father, kept the whole Torah before it was given. What does that mean? Hainu. It doesn't mean that Avraham Avinu did the physical mitzvahs because they weren't given yet. Hainu, what does it mean? Whatever we accomplish with our mitzvahs, he was able to accomplish without the mitzvahs. Now, when I say whatever, it means the basic idea, not on the level that we do it, but the basic idea of what is accomplished, or what happens when we do a mitzvah. And what happens when we do the mitzvah is that we facilitate the divine. Facilitating the divine meaning, let me turn it into simple words that we can understand. We download the divine into ourselves when we're doing the mitzvah. Now, when we say we download the divine, we don't only mean, I'm using, divine is not a good word. We download God, not divinity. Divinity could imply to certain limited and contracted emanations of God. Limited, contracted, already filtered energies of God. That's not the point. That's great. That it would be wonderful on its own. But we're talking about something much higher. Talking about unfiltered, infinite light of God. That, to be able to channel that and download that, that's really becoming infused with infinity. That's the beauty of Torah and Mitzvah. In Torah and Mitzvahs, we reach the infinite, and we draw the infinite without filtering it. We enable the infinite, when I say without filtering, meaning without reducing its voltage, that the infinite can flow through us and in us and become eventually integrated with us. So that basic idea of connecting to the infinite and downloading the infinite, Abraham already achieved that. Although his flow was a far less potent flow than the flow that happens today when we do a mitzvah, because he didn't have the physical mitzvah. But he's going to explain how Abraham accomplished it. Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, all of our patriarchs and matriarchs, they accomplished it through their spiritual service. I know, what does that mean? Shehim Shech, that Avraham Avinu, our father Avraham, drew down oil, light, from the encompassing and light. In Kabbalah and mysticism, it explains that God fills all worlds, that God fills all worlds. Filling all worlds means that God mitigates his energy, reduces his energy to the finite. That's why he fills, like filling a cup. I could only fill the cup with water, the amount of water that fills into this glass, into this whatever. Right? I can't put in the entire bottle into this because this cup is too small. So to fill it has to be, the water has to be commensurate with the vessel. So when we say God fills all worlds, that's what I mentioned earlier called divinity. Divine light that fills the creation. But it isn't bigger than the creation. It's the inner energy of the creation. It's the force in creation, but it's still limited to the constrictions of time and space, to the constrictions of creation. But then there is what we call Sovev Kalam, the encompassing light. The encompassing light is God's infinite light that is boundless, that has never reduced itself. And that's what it means. Shehim Shechor Mebchinas Sovev Kalam. That Avraham Avinu was able to enact, draw down, and download the infinite, transcendental light of God. Shazehu, which he says, this is what all of Torah and all of Mitzvahs is all about. If you really want to get the crux of it, the crux of all of Judaism is to facilitate the bond between the infinite and the finite. It's to draw down it's to draw down the Sovev, the infinite light of God, into the creation. Where do we see that this is the crux of all of Yiddishkeit? So we know that before every time we do a mitzvah, before we do any godly act, any commandment, we say, or even if we don't say it then, but we say it in the morning and it covers the whole day, we say l'shem yichud, that all this, my observance, my service to God, l'shem, should be for the sake, yichud, of causing a unification, kutche berichu u'shechinte, between HaKadosh Baruch Hu and the Shekhinah. What is a Kadosh Baruch Hu and Shekhinah? Shekhinah is the limited light of God, God dwelling within the creation. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the masculine light of God, the infinite light, the transcendental light. And we're saying the purpose of my mitzvah is to fuse, to cause a fusion between these two energies. The infinite light should fuse into the finite light. And if the Shekhinah, that is the finite aspect of God, God's immanence within creation, is filled with the infinite light, from the Shekhinah, who is the soul of creation, it will trickle into the creation itself. That the creations themselves will open up to receive infinite light and infinite power inside of them. Eternity and infinity and so on and so forth. As explained in many places. So all of Judaism in a nutshell is to cause this marriage, this fusion. Look in the discourse of Zoysa Mitzvah Parshas Veschana, which I checked up, which he explains it very beautifully, this idea. And in the verse, the discourse on the verse of Shabsayse, which I did not look up. But Olakach, I don't know what it says over there, even though we learned that discourse many years ago. Olakach, and therefore, so this fusion, Abraham is the first person who began this union. That's why it says that the Arizal says that from Avraham Avinu starts the Yichud. That's the words of the Arizal. The Yichud, the unification, the marriage of heaven and earth, begins with Abraham. Elakach hoya avidasai, and that is the reason why Avraham's service. If we look in the Torah about what the Torah tells us about Avram, we find him that he was journeying, and in his journeys he says he was going, and he was holoch, he was moving, v'naso, and he was traveling. So the deeper meaning of going and traveling, simply it means going, traveling. He's moving one direction. But the way the mystics explain what it means he was going and traveling means he was moving and returning, moving and returning. So Avram is, and this is the kind of a description, not just of one journey that Avram took. This is like once Avram became 75 and God communicated with him, the story of Lech Lecha, the first commandment to Abraham is go, and then for the rest of his life, he's on the move. That's the idea. God told him to go to the promised land, but once he comes into the promised land, you find him traveling, and he's going from here. He's setting up his tent in this place, and then he's setting up his tent in that place. So these physical travels were just a reflection of the spiritual movement that was going on in his soul. And how was he traveling? He was traveling in a manner in which he was going forward and retracing, moving forward and retracing, back and forth. This concept, as he says, he was racing and retracting. Why? What do you find? Let him move. Why was he always in a state of going and going back and going and going back? Because when a finite being is reaching for infinite energy and tries to connect to infinite energy and doesn't want to lose his or her identity in this process, you can only touch it and retract, touch it and retract. Because if you go all the way in one dimension, then you become sucked up by the infinite and you lose your existence completely. So and that's not the intention. The intention is for you to remain. The purpose over here is God wants us to anchor him and pull him down into the world. So it would defeat the purpose if you get so excited about the infinite and you allow the infinite to suck you up into the infinite, and then you lose your boundaries of what defines you as being you. You kind of melt away into the infinite, like happened to the two sons of Aaron the day that the Mishkan was hinted to in this week's parsha. God says, I will become sanctified with my holy ones, Parshas Tetzaveh, which means that later we find the terrible story where Nadav and Avihu passed out when they were because they allowed themselves to be sucked into the infinite light of God without any restraints. That's not the purpose. So here's the thing. If one is engaging and interacting only with the finite lights, with the emanations of God that are contained in vessels that are limited, so that type of energy, you don't have to touch it and retract, because it's possible to enter into a vessel, so you can kind of take it and have it. But when you're touching the infinite, when you're bonding with the Or Ein Sof, and you're causing it, what does it mean to touch it? It means that you're causing the infinite to reveal itself inside of you. It can only be in a state of yes and no, positive and negative energy, input, whatever they call it. It's like electricity that has a yeah and a no. These two things have to constantly, this is the pulse of it. Because to draw down from such a lofty place, which is beyond the entire chain-like progression of worlds, Ishtalshalos means a chain, meaning above the descent of God. You're reaching God Almighty himself in all of his infinity, and you want to connect to that place. On that level of energy cannot be drawn. It can only be accessed through a manner of racing towards it and retracting. So that's why Avraham, in his service to Hashem, was always in a state of racing, retracting. He was traveling. And therefore, and that is the reason why when Avraham was physically traveling, his physical travels were just a reflection of what was going on in his soul. Abraham served God with love. How did Abraham attract the infinite? He was attracting the infinite. The infinite should reveal, and God speaks to him. Why? Because Avraham, God reveals himself to those who seek him. Avraham was seeking God, but it's not just seeking, like, a little seeking. Avraham became obsessed with God, and his desire, and he experienced the most powerful, unimaginable quest and yearning for the infinite to reveal itself to him. And in that intent, that's called, Abraham is the champion of love. He is the facilitator of divine love. So his love is indescribable. His yearning, his desire for that infinite. And so that was his service. But the way he achieved it was he experienced intense love, but he would retract, recoil, race and recoil. Because again, if his love would allow him, if he would just allow the love to just go all the way, take him all the way, he wouldn't come back. He wouldn't be alive in this world. Therefore, the service of Avram, of his love, and what caused Avram to experience this boundless love, which caused God to reveal himself to Avram's neshama, was because Avram meditated on the transcendence of God. You see, if Avram meditation would have been, God, whatever you're reaching for, that's what you can possibly be revealed to you. If Avram's excitement would have been to God as he's a source of creation, then only the God that's a source of creation would reveal itself to him. But Avram understood that God is much bigger than being a source of creation. And that's where Avram's desire was to peek at, to see, to experience the transcendence of God. Like the angels will say, holy, holy, holy. They recognize that God is above. So Avram had this burning desire for the transcendence of God. And that's why God appeared to Avram Avinu from the transcendental place. But to somewhere so high, that energy can't settle in your vessels. You can touch it, and then it's present. It's revealed and not revealed. It's there and not there. That's the back and forth. There is the tension. There has to be an intent. There has to be an ongoing tension between yes and no happening. Which stemmed from his contemplation. The love came from his mind, from his understanding, from his appreciation of the Sefer Kalam, of the encompassing energy of God. Was in a manner of racing forward and recoiling backwards. Why? He explains. The soul cannot tolerate the illumination, the radiance of this love. It's not the radiance of your love. When you're loving somebody and you're actually making a connection, there's a love going in both directions. The love of person A to person B, and person B allowing themselves to be loved and shining their light or their energy to person A. So in our case, when Avram is loving God and God's revelation to him in that love, the soul can't the soul being finite in the sense that it's a soul of a person, cannot tolerate it. So it can touch it, it can sense it, it can bathe in that love, but it needs to pull back, recoil, back and forth, back and forth. Only in a state of running and returning. So now you have, that's the reason why in the story of Lech Lecha, it speaks about Avram traveling, holech v'nasaya, back and forth. It's more than just a story about physical traveling. It's a very deep concept that was going on in the inner experiences of Abraham, of Avram. There's a verse, and he says, look in Likutei Torah, on the discourse in the volume 2 of this book of Torah, which is Likutei Torah, in the Maimer on Shmini Atzeres, on Sukkot discourses. Over there's a short discourse on the words Toiv Lachzos B'Hashem. It is better to find shelter in God, miptoach ba'adam, than to trust in man. So the obvious question is, you need King David to tell you that. It's better to trust in God than trust man, of course. You shouldn't trust any man. You should trust only God. Put your faith and put your trust in God, not in people. People can't deliver. God could deliver. It's much deeper meaning. When we says man, it doesn't mean, Mr. Finkel, whatever. When it says man, it's speaking about the supernal man. It's better to find shelter in God than to trust in the supernal man. What does it mean? We spoke earlier. God manifests himself already into containers and into vessels. That's called the supernal man. That's what we call the indwelling light of God, Memala Kalalman, where God kind of takes on a form already. He limits himself into vessels. And then there is Hashem's infinity, the Orein Sof, the Sof of Kalam. So the verse is saying like this. The benefit of a person meditating on the divine that is immanent and within the world, starting off by being within the divine attributes, the benefit of connecting to that level of godliness is that you don't have to connect and retract. That level of godliness, since it's the source of containers and the source of vessels, and it goes into vessels and it goes into containers, is something that you can connect to and completely assimilate it and be comfortable with. However, if you're meditating on transcendental energy, on the infinite light of God, you can touch it and recall, like touching a hot fire. Yeah and no, you can like just a quick, you have to pull back immediately or else it will swallow you alive. So therefore, one might argue and think it's better to connect to a lower level of the divine that you can kind of assimilate into yourself without having to let go of it, versus connecting to the infinite where you have to let go. And the fact that you have to hold on and let go means that even when you have it, you're not really grasping it. It's always aloof. So the verse is saying like this, listen here closely to the words. It's better to find shelter in Yud Kei Vav Kei. Yud Kei Vav Kei is the infinite line. The tetragrammaton is referring to the infinity. Even though you're only finding shelter meaning when you find shelter when it's raining outside and you find shelter in a little booth, the booth is above you. It's above you. You're going under an awning. You're going under something. It's higher than you. It's better to connect yourself to godliness that's higher than you, even though you can only shelter in it. You can't really absorb it. Mibtoach, toach comes from the word to fully attach yourself. It means to become like cemented or to become like sealed, ba'adam, in the supernal man above. Even though over here you can kind of really latch onto it and hold on to it, and here you can only touch it and leave go touching it. But it's better. Why? Because this is infinite. And that is already a limited divinity. So in that discourse is where he's explaining this concept, that when one meditates on God's immanence and it produces love, that kind of love can be a constant. It doesn't need to come in a way where you get close and you step back. But when you're dealing with a higher connection, over there the voltage is so high that you can only dare touch it and move back. So here's the beauty of it. This infinite light, which we channel down when we're learning Torah and doing mitzvahs, we're actually channeling that light down into our bodies. Abraham was able to accomplish it not through a mitzvah. Avram was able to accomplish it through his yearning, through his love, through his spiritual, psychological experiences that were taking place, his meditative soul. He was an unbelievable philosopher and thinker, and he would meditate very deeply on the divine, and he would experience intense yearnings for God that are just incomprehensible how intense those were. And he reached this level of attaching himself not just to the divine, but to God itself, to the infinite. How did he do it? As we learned, yes and no. There was the yes and no factor, the plus and the minus, continuously. Once Avram made that connection, his children, which are us, we were given that as a gift. We don't need to make the most massive meditative journeys in order to connect to the infinite light. It's given to us. We have all the buttons Avram needed to do the wiring himself. We have the wires all connected. All we need to do is hit the download button. And that's through our mitzvahs. Now, it's interesting in the discourse, he says, Since in order to connect to such infinite light, you can only do it in a way, in order that it shouldn't completely destroy us, you can only do it in a way in which you are, as we said before, plus and minus, a yes and a no. That's why our mitzvahs are also given to us in a yes and no. The positive mitzvahs, our mitzvahs are divided in general into two types: positive mitzvahs and prohibitive mitzvahs. So the yes in the mitzvahs, the positive mitzvahs is the yes. It's the soul surging outward to connect. It's the plus. It's the touching the light. And then the prohibitive mitzvah, which in living the life of a Jew is constantly this, this I need to do, this I shouldn't do. In the not doing, we recoil. In the yeah doing, we're connecting. So we have what Avraham did in his spiritual service. We have it already all ingrained in a certain system that contains the yeah and the no. So it would seem like we're even with Abraham. He was able to do it through his meditation. We connect to the infinite. It's all finished business. You put on tefillin. The infinite is flowing. But we need to understand. Sometimes it is considered, even though we hail Avraham Avinu, we applaud him, our forefathers, for what they were able to achieve without, as we say Abraham was able to, did all the mitzvahs without having, before it was given. Right? He was able to, the spiritual dynamics of the mitzvahs he achieved. But there are times that this is considered it's considered a deficiency. That he did not merit the Torah and the mitzvahs. He came on a little too early in history, and he lived before the giving of the Torah. And we say it's a shame, If only he could have only lived to get the Torah, then he would have really, right? So, but hold it, didn't we say whatever we do through the Torah, he did already? So he's going to explain now. In the next, till now, the rest of the first chapter, the first paragraph, he's going to explain why our service of our mitzvahs exceed Abraham's spiritual connection. We would think Abraham's was much greater than ours, because since he was doing it through his own service, he actually felt the infinite. We channel the infinite, we don't feel anything. We put on tefillin, we don't necessarily feel anything. We light Shabbos candles, we don't necessarily feel anything. And Avram would feel the infinite. He would, to the point, as we said earlier, you have to let go immediately. And we also have that, but we're not really cognizant of it. But yet, there is a much deeper godliness flowing in our mitzvahs. And that's what he's going to explain now. At times, it's considered a lacking. That he did not merit to the Torah and the mitzvahs, the Torah and the mitzvot that were given at Sinai. This will be understood with Biur, Inyan, Pirish, Nasa, V'nishma. We'll understand that when the Torah was given to us, we said, Nasa, we will do, V'nishma, we will hear. So usually the question everybody asks is, and I asked the same question on Monday, how can you do before you hear? You can first hear, and then you can do. You got to first know what you need to do. But here he gives a deeper meaning into the do and the hear. And the point over here is like this. When we're doing a mitzvah, what are we doing? When we're doing a mitzvah, we are doing a physical action. We're setting up a certain physical situation. Okay? What's the mitzvah? Next week we have a few special mitzvahs. People are busy making baskets now, special decorating it. Everybody's figuring out creative ways of making shalach manas. It's the mitzvah of Purim that we should send gifts, food gifts to other people. So you make a little basket for Purim. And when you do that, God is now, I don't know, most people forget about when they're doing the shalach manas, they're actually doing a mitzvah, and God is now manifesting in their life through this mitzvah. So when you're setting up, the two things are happening. There is the physical item. You go into the grocery store and buying a chocolate and whatever else you're giving, a little bottle of grape juice or wine. You got your mitzvah, you got your 2 items. Put it in a little something, you deliver it to your neighbor. There you go, you got your mitzvah. When you did the mitzvah is the vessel, the container. In this mitzvah, the infinite light dwells in this action. While you're giving it over, there is a flow of, you're not feeling it, but there is a flow of infinity that's flowing in this action, in that doing of the mitzvah. So here's the thing. The action represents creating the vessel. That's called nasa, we will do. Vinishma, we will hear, means not we will hear. Vinishma means the download of the infinite energy. That's called hearing. Why? Because the word nishma also comes from the word to gather. There's a verse that says, Vayeshama Shaul es kol ha'am, that Shaul, King Saul, gathered the people. And in that biblical verse, it uses the word nishma, Vayeshama, same root as the word nishma, but it doesn't mean listening, it means to gather together. So he's basically saying what the Jewish people said at Sinai: we will provide vessels, Vinishma, and then we will draw down the lights into the vessels. A whole new meaning of Nasa Vinishma. We will create the vessel, and then we will draw the light. But you can ask the question, why start with making the vessel? Maybe we should first access the light, draw the light down, and then we'll create a vessel afterwards to hold the light. But he says that that's not the water. It doesn't work that way. When there is no vessel, there is no light. That's the rule. That's the rule. You need to have containers for lights to reveal itself. For divine energy, for any energy to come down, the vessel precedes the energy. Create me a vessel, you'll have light. No vessel, no light. Which means no flow. The who, and this is the idea, okay? But he's going to explain why is that? Why do you need containers to draw divinity down? What's the purpose of that? Who kinasa, because nasa means we will do. Tikkun Hakaylim. It means we will prepare the vessels. Al derech, like we find remach pekudin inin remach evarim the malka. The 248 commandments. These are the 248 limbs of the king. What's a limb? A limb is a container for an energy. The soul's energy flows in the limbs. The 248 mitzvahs are the 248 limbs of the king. In heaven, they are the spiritual limbs of God. Down here below, they take on a physical form. As we said, the mitzvah of sending gifts to your friend, your neighbor on Purim, do it any other day, it's nothing. But do it on Purim, it's one of the 248. It's not a biblical commandment, okay? It's from the rabbinic commandment, but you do the physical action, you're creating the vessel through which the divine energy will flow. Shehem B'chinas Kayeim, these are the vessels, the Gilui inside. Baruch Hu, for the revelation of the Infinite One, blessed to see. Kamoisha Aver, just like a limb or the organ. Ukeli is a vessel to the energy that flows from the soul. That's nasa. Nasa means we will create the vessels. Upidish nishma, and when we say we will do and then we will hear, what does that mean? Once you have the container, once the container is there, now you can download the energy to flow into the vessel. When one fulfills this mitzvah. Now that we know what nasa means creating the vessels. And nishma means to pump the light, to pump the energy. So why did they put nasa first? Maybe we should pump the energy first, and then we'll worry about containers. So the reason is because the mitzvot, which are the vessels, they are the ones that cause that the lights should come down. Without the vessels, the lights don't manifest. And that the lights should be drawn, and that they should expand, that they should spread out into the vessels. But if there's no containers, there are no vessels, the energies would remain completely in their abstract, withdrawn. The energies would remain in their source. They would not emanate outward. They need containers. He's going to explain two explanations of why energy will never flow unless there is a container first. One reason, and then a deeper reason. A more simpler reason, and then a higher reason. It's not just two separate explanations. It's one within the next. Okay? The first explanation is as follows. Based on what it says, he's going to give a very physical demonstration to this. The verse says that God is compared to fire. God is a consuming fire. So if the verse now God obviously is not fire. God creates fire. Fire is one of his creations. The fact that from all substances the Torah chooses to compare God to a fire, and when we find that when God does appear in the physical world, in many, many revelations, he appears like flames of fire and so on and so forth. Why the fire? Because the fire best expresses the way certain elements of fire are very reflective of abstract energy, as we'll see soon. So whenever you see a fire, you see like this. Hinei, for behold, our visible fire is a manifestation, a physical manifestation of a more abstract energy. Why do we see that? There are four elements in the world. And this is a fundamental understanding of Kabbalah. Everything is made up of four elements. Ancient philosophers all looked at the world in this way, that there is Eish, there is fire, there is Ruach, there is wind, there is Mem, which is Mayim, which is water, and Ayin, which is Afar. That means the four elements: fire, wind, water, and earth. Now, the way they are, everything is composed from these four elements, as Maimonides discusses at great length in the beginning of this. But these four elements, we understand there are heavier elements amongst them. There's earth, which is heavier. Water is less than earth, not as heavy as earth. And wind is lighter, and fire is the lightest. So based on that, if you stack them up one on top of the other, the earth will go to the bottom. The water will be the next. Like we find that water sits on top of the globe, on top of the earth. Above that is air. And above all of that is fire. So the ancient philosophers who understood this had a problem. They were wondering, how come when you look up in the sky, you don't see, if fire is high, then somewhere when we look up out into the atmosphere, we should see the glowing element of fire. How come we don't see fire? They all were very much, there should be a circle of fire that's kind of like above the atmosphere. When we're looking out, we should see this circle, this ring of fire. Yet we don't. Or any direction we look, it should be completely a sphere of fire around. So they explain that the essence of the element of fire is not hot, it's not glowing, it's not radiant. The essence is invisible. It's a very thin type of air. It's a type of gas, if you might call it. It's very, 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 very thin, very, very thin. I mean, very unsubstantial, very elegant, very pure, very. When it comes into action, it flares up as fire. But in its essential state, in other words, its revelation is luminance as fire. But in its essential state, that's why you don't see fire, even though it exists as. Whenever we create a fire, we somehow draw down that energy into manifestation. But here we find an interesting thing. You never see floating fires in the atmosphere. Just out there, suddenly there's flashes of manifesting of this. In other words, since there's an element of essential fire, which is out there, and when it reveals itself as hot and fire, so we should have like flashes of, we do have lightning, but that's something else. We should have just moments when these fire, like suddenly like fire turns out on the sky, like these The answer is it doesn't, because it needs a vessel to hold on to. It never manifests without a vessel. So here it is. If you prepare wood and you prepare other flammable materials, you strike a match, you kind of draw this energy. This energy is kind of like, I don't know how it works, and the science of it, I have no idea. How kind of, when I say the science, I mean modern science and even ancient science of exactly how this would work, I don't know. How you actually draw upon this power that's there. And now, only when you have a vessel, you have wood or other, as we said, flammable material, can that now fire come down into a manifest, actualized, perceivable by the eye, and hot fire. The moment, and what happens? It burns and burns and burns until there's nothing to consume anymore. The Mitzvahs no, until there's nothing left over of the vessel. And then what happens to that powerful energy that was just there? Could be a blazing inferno, could be huge. What happens to it? It disappears. Where did it go? It reverts back to its pure essential state, which is undetectable and you can't see it, you don't know it, but it's there. So God is exactly the same thing. That's in that sense, God is compared to fire. He's invisible, undetectable. He is, but not in any way that we can, you create the right vessels for him, which is the mitzvot, then you have him in a manifest state. You have the divine present in a real, like fire. Suddenly it's here, it's hot, it's powerful. You get all the energy from it. Fire can cook, it can run an engine, it can, all this fuel, power that the fire creates is enormous. But you got to activate it. It doesn't activate itself without a vessel. That's the point. And the vessel has to be there first. You have the vessel, it will connect. So now we'll read that inside. Yesh dal yesod is eshrech ruach mayim, and off of yesod the esh, and the element of fire lamaila is above meruach mayim, higher than wind and higher than water and offer and earth. Kiutachas galgal yerach, it's under the constellation of the moon, or the whatever it's called, the orbit of the moon. Yesh chakira bein hachoykrim b'mehusay, and the philosophers have a question regarding its substance of this fire. Why were they bothered? Hinei akushya, their question is, why at night is it dark? That means you look up, you don't see the glowing lights of the fire that surrounds, that the element of fire that surrounds the Batiritzu. And the answer is that the visible light and fire that is taking hold of the wick, the eitzim, and of wood, that's not the essence of the fire. This is an illumination, v'hashpa, and an influence miyasod eish. The pure, invisible, undetectable, essential fire is now downloading, so to speak. It downloads into a fire. It's a revelation of it. But the element of fire on its own, it's the source of the light, va'esh, and of the fire. But it itself is not at all. It's not in any way like fire that's on a wick. The fire that's on the wick, is only a ray, and something that was drawn from it, but not it. And therefore, that's why from the element of fire at all, there's no light coming from it. It's only when you draw down a download of it, something of that fire, and how do you draw it down? Only with a vessel, as we're going to see. Then you get heat and brightness and all the qualities of what we know of a physical fire. Only when the fire got drawn down onto a wick, that's when it is shining. However, we see that this rays, if you say it takes a ray of it, a download of it, why doesn't it just flare up anywhere at all time? When we see Miu Agoyrim, what is it what causes that the fire should be drawn from its source, from its elementary fire? This is the wick or the wood, which they serve as the containers, in which the fire takes hold. And that's when it's drawn, when there is a vessel, and reveals itself down here, which means to our physical sensors. Which isn't the case when you do not have a wick, or when the wick got burnt up. So then the fire retracts. It retracts to its private state, to it being within itself. And when it is within itself, we don't even see it. We can't apprehend it. We don't know it. It's a type of invisible type of, I don't know, whatever. It goes back to its source of the foundation of the fire, which means, and it reverts from a manifest revealed state, back to a private concealed state. And to us, it's just darkness. And all this is metaphoric. We can understand this, we can appreciate this above. God compares himself to fire, which needs a vessel. Now, above there are spiritual vessels. The 10 sephirot, the 10 attributes, are made up of vessels. What are the vessels of the sephirot? Their design, like this is kindness. So that's already considered a container, a vessel. Then there is the light. What's the light? The pure power. The energy of God is not kindness and not severity and not compassion and not, these are all already considered bodies. They're all considered already definitions. It's just pure, simple, abstract energy. That's the light. But the light is what gives power. But that light will not give power and not manifest outward. It will remain, God will remain totally in himself, in his invisible, unknowable, abstract self, unless there is a vessel there in which he can take on and serve as a power for that energy. But there has to be a container. So the light is a revelation and a flow from the supernal emanator, Baruch Hu, blessed is he, and the vessel, Ubchenas Eser Sfiros. That's the 10 attributes. Chachma Ubina, beginning with the attribute of wisdom and the attribute of understanding, which are the intellectual attributes. And then there is Chagas, which are the emotional attributes, which stands for Chesed, Gevura, Teferes, kindness, severity, and beauty. And Chulu, and the other 4, Netzachod, Yesod, Malchus, Shem B'chinas Kayeim, which these are the containers, Shebehem Nimshach v'Nechasa Or, Or Ein Sof Baruch. Over there is where the Or Ein Sof takes on, is able to take hold of something, and now become, we know that there's no visibility of God to the creation only through the supernal man, only through the image. God projects himself like a king, like a father, like a shepherd, something. He comes into a state of revelation. Other than that, he's utterly unknown and private. But in order for him to come down, he has to flow his energy into something, and these are the vessels. Hinei, so now we understand what these 10 sephirot above, if you break them, if you further analyze them in all their detail, these are the 10 attributes, you'll find that there's really 248. The 10 turn into 248. Why? Because there is the Hinei. Now, and those 248, we create that same supernal man, we created in a physical form by doing the physical mitzvahs. The same supernal man. And in that, God can now manifest in our physical bodies. It can literally be him in our body. but we have to organize our bodies to be consistent with the 248 limbs above. And that's what mitzvahs are. Mitzvahs is just the manual and the instructions of how we align our physical bodies and selves with the supernal man above. We conduct ourselves. We eat the same diet that God eats in heaven. We dress the same way that God dresses. We avoid the clothing that he would not wear and the food that he would not eat. And we take the rest day that he would rest. And we do exactly like we behave the godly. We translate the godly down here. This is just physical containers that are now incorporating within them the spiritual containers, and they're all containers. And once there is containers, the power flows inside of us. Infinite energy. And as we said earlier, we become divine. We become conduits of the divine. But the main point is you need to first have the vessel. And that's why Na'aseh we will do, and then V'nishma we will draw down. Hinei Ma'aseh mitzvahs. Now you're going to ask the question, how did we get to 248 if there's only 10 attributes? So as you can explain now. Hinei Ma'aseh mitzvahs, and the actions of mitzvahs. Shenikra Ramach Evarim, which are called the 248 limbs of the king. Zehayoisam Zehu. This means Hayoisam B'chinas Kayeim. They are the containers, the Eser spheres of the 10 sphere. You take the 10 supernal attributes above, translate them down here, you will have 248 mitzvahs. That's what it is. God is basically saying, I'm giving you an opportunity to be me, to be my container. Kenoida, as it is known, Alkain, and therefore Al Yadei Kiyama Maisa, and it is therefore through the fulfillment of the action. Shahu. And what does it mean in these actions? Asiyas Ribu Kayeim, we make an abundance of vessels. Hainu, Tes, Pam, and Tes. Even though we speak about 10 attributes, we minus one. Because Malchut, kingship, is already just revelation. The essential structure is only 9 attributes. So you take the 9, and we know that every attribute contains all the others, because they are interlaced one with each other. They are composites, these attributes. So it's kindness integrates severity, and severity integrates kindness. And so each attribute, so you have to make 9 times 9. So 9 times 9 gives you 81. So now you have a full. So from the 9 Sefirot, we already have 81 Sefirot. 81 limbs. And in every limb, there is the outer element of the limb, the middle element, and the inside element. The Pnimius, the middle, and the external. It's called Rosh Toch Sof. So you have to make times 3. 81 times 3 is 243. Then there are 5 powers that it calls expansion, because these limbs need to grow and they need to be fully developed vessels. 5 powers of kindness, which the mystics talk about, which complete the vessel. So the 10 Sefirot, in their full manifest and full, in order for them to serve as a perfect body for the Ein Sof, it's really 248. That's when they're fully developed. In our lives, it means these are the 248 mitzvot, with all the details of how to do these mitzvahs. And then we're perfectly created ourselves to be the vessels. In our bodies is incorporated the divine attributes, but that's only attributes. And in that attribute comes the soul itself, which is the Or Ein Sof, dwells inside of us. So Tes Pam and Tes Oila Pei Aleph equals 81. In each one there is the beginning, the middle, and the end. Oila Reish Mem Gimel, that equals 243. The Hechasadim, and there's 5 powers of kindness. Hamagdilin, that causes them to expand and to grow. Nimtzazeu B'chinas Ribu Kayeim, comes out, you've created an abundance of vessels. Shakol Sfira Klila Metes, because every one of the attributes now is included of 9. Umegimel B'chinas Rosh Teich V'Soif, and from fully developing it into the beginning, middle, and end. V'gam hagdolasan, and also the expansion al yedei chasadim, which comes through these 5 powers of kindness. So what you've basically done when you observe the mitzvot, v'hu tikkun v'hagdolas evarim, we are then rectifying and expanding the limbs, the cosmic limbs, the kayeim, and the vessels, the ze'er anpin of the small man. Small man means the body of God. That's called the small man. As it is explained in the writings of the Ari. Bidrush Ibr Yanika Moichen, in which there is a special portal that deals with a special expounded deals with these 3 stages of pregnancy, nursing, and maturity. 3 stages we spoke earlier: the lower vessels, the middle stage, the further developed. And this is the meaning we will do. We will first create all these vessels. How do I create God's body? We create God's body up there and down here. When you're following what the Torah says, his limbs are. So when you take your physical, and God created us with the right amount of limbs. So when you take your right arm and you give tzedakah with it, you just now facilitated that. Created it, facilitated it now. And that's why through the charity, and other acts of kindness, misaknim, we rectify, or prepare, and we make, we prepare the divine right arm. There's an air anpin of the small face above, which is referring to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's not small, it's the infinite, but compared to the Keter, which is Or Ein Sof, it doesn't have any definition, it's called small face. And same is true with all the commandments. Every mitzvah we fix B'chinas Keli, pay, maybe means Keli Ploini. I don't know what that pay is. And when we do that, vinishma, then we can draw down. Now the lights can come flowing into the vessels. What does it mean the lights are coming into the vessels? It means an enormous influx of infinite energy flowing into the universe. An added light and revelation from the infinite one, blessed is he, because now there is abundance of vessels. Now there is something in which the light can take hold of, the abstract light. Like we spoke earlier, that when you have wicks and you have wood, you can draw down. Which is in the case if there's, God forbid, the lacking of the vessel. The light means God's manifest presence returns back into potential, into the infinite, unknowable, unspecified, and therefore indetectable and unrelatable, removed from the universe and from the world, and completely as if he doesn't exist. The light goes back into its source, and its root, in supernal emanator. And this is the deeper meaning of the verse that says that God, your God, is compared to a fire, a consuming fire. Just like a fire, that when it's lacking a wick, the fire goes back up to its root. Okay. For that reason, the sages say a very, very powerful statement. In Ethics of the Fathers, the sages say, an ignoramus cannot be pious. So what? Maybe a person is very simple and pious. What do you mean? So simply, in order to be pious means you have to do what's right. You have to know what to do. So how do you know? How can you keep Shabbos if you didn't know the laws of Shabbos? So you have to know. You have to study the laws of Shabbos, then you can be pious by keeping Shabbat. You have to study the laws of the dietary laws of kashrut, then you can keep it. If you know it. If you don't know it, you'll inevitably be going to make mistakes. And therefore, you're not going to be so pious. You might have good intentions, but you can't do it. That's the simple meaning. The deeper meaning is as follows. Chassid really means, the concept of a chassid means a spiritual being. Someone who is driven to connect to God. That's the idea of chassid. Because the root of the word chassid is chesed. And the inner soul of chesed, which is kindness, the inner soul of chesed, of kindness, is love. And in the context of a relationship with God, it means, a chassid means someone who activates his kind love. What does that mean? He or she is filled with love to God. Now, when you're loving somebody, it's a two-way channel. You can love and love and love, but if the person is not responding, then there's no point to the love. There has to be a channel. And channel means you have to connect. In the love, the point is that you love someone and they love you back. There's a connection. Abraham, for instance, was the big chassid. He was a supernal chassid. He was the awesome chassid. He loved God. But Abraham was cool because in his love itself, he managed to get God to respond. His love itself was enough of an attraction to pull God into the relationship because he was a super mega soul. So with his love himself, he managed to catch God. He managed to establish a romance with God. And God connected, and he provided the vessel. What was his vessel? His soul itself was the vessel, and he knew how to dance the right dance of touching God through the yet and the no, like we discussed earlier, and he manifested it. But since Abraham, no one else can do it in a pure spiritual way. We have to do it through the physical actions. Because if you're just going to love and desire and connect, but you're not going to have the physical minute. So you can love and quest for the infinite, but it's not manifesting. It won't manifest in your soul. You need actions of mitzvahs, because only when you have vessels and containers can God vessel. So it's good to have the love, and we're supposed to develop the love. But along with that, we need to do the actions of the mitzvah. Put on tefillin, then your love will attract. But now that there is tefillin there, God can now connect, download, and the fire can turn on in your life in the tefillin and so forth. As he says, Pirish. Ki chassid, the idea of chassid, of pious sign in b'chinas midas ava. Someone who has the element of love, shenikra chesed, which is called chesed. Now, va'afta, the verse says, you should love. Right? That's in the Shema. And the word va'afta is, the gematria of it is 400. Taf is 400. Hey is 5, so 4, 5. Then 2 is, Beis is 7. So 407 plus 1, 408. Plus Vav, which is 408 plus 4, 414. So Vahafta's gematria of 414. Oyer, light, numeric value of the word oyer is 207. 2 times 207 is 414. So it says that Vahafta, you should love, is gematria 2 times light. What does that mean? The way I understand it is, 2 times light means your light going to God, your love reaching God, and God's love shining back to you. That's what the love is. It's an energy with an energy fusing. So God says, love me, and I will love you. So there's a connection. But that needs an observance of mitzvahs. You need to create vessels for that. Just the naked love itself will not create a sustainable relationship. You see it even in human relationships. You can't have a relationship with someone. You can love your spouse to death. If you just have love and it's not accompanied by actions of love, it needs vessels. You need to live together, care for each other, cook for each other, provide for each other, do things. It needs to, or else if it's just left in the abstract, it fizzles very fast. Nothing to hold it. You love, you got to buy the flowers. You got to show the love. You got to clean up the kitchen. Take out the garbage. Do, show, care. Put it into an action. Channel it down into something substantial. That's the vessel. The pure romance itself of the love doesn't hold. Doesn't. Begematria base palmim or 2 times light. V'chol or, since love means it's an energy. The love itself is the connection of energies, but an energy can only take hold. It needs a vessel. What it should take hold in. In order that the lights of the love should reveal itself in your soul. Is only through vessels, which they are the Torah and the Mitzvahs. Understood, moving. The Amaretz, that ignorant, is someone who doesn't study Torah. That doesn't therefore study Torah, and therefore he's also not capable of doing mitzvot because he doesn't even know what the mitzvahs are or how to do them correctly. He's not of the Torah and of the mitzvahs. Can't be really a spiritual person. You can be spiritual. It's nice to be spiritual, but that you really have real meaning to it. That your spirituality is causing you to connect. That there is a light from above taking hold in your soul that can only be when there is observance. Observance must come along with the spirituality. That's why they put "we will do" before "we will hear." That's what we also find in the story of the Shunamis. Was the woman who came to the Elisha. She cried out. She said that what? Not the Shunamis. There was the wife of one of the Nevi'im. She said that she was poor. The creditors are coming to take her children. And he told her, "What do you have in the house?" She says, "I have nothing. I have a little jug of oil." He told her to go borrow vessels. Go borrow from your neighbors. And then he said, take the oil and pour in the vessels. And the verse describes that, and he said, keep and borrow a lot of them and keep on bringing. Don't stop the flow. Keep it pouring. And then it says, she tells her children, bring me. She said, close the door and then fill the vessels. And then she says, give me more. The miracle happened. The oil was flowing and flowing endlessly. And then they said, what did they say? They said, there's no more container. And at that moment, the oil stopped. You see from here that the flow of oil can only be where there's a container. And that's spiritually as well. When we stop doing mitzvahs, we cannot complain that we don't feel. If you want to feel, go. Get to do more mitzvahs. Do more charity, do more kindness, observe, keep Shabbos, put it to tefillin, keep the law, take on another mitzvah. It's not easy for people who haven't been doing it all their life. Even for people who do it all their life, it's hard. For those that are late beginners, for sure it's hard. But take on more and more. Keep on adding. Because when you add more in the observance, then the spiritual energies should and will also increase. Ein oid keli, if there's no more vessel, the yamid hasham, and the oil will stop. The ilu haya oid kelim, and if she would have had more vessels, haya oid riba yam shachas ha'aris, she would have had so much more lights. But she lost it because there was no more vessel. This is from the reason that was mentioned above. This is all an explanation. Why? Remember we said there's going to be 2 explanations. Why first you need to have the vessels, and then this was the first explanation. Now he's going to explain a second explanation. According to this, the vessel is just a container. An energy that's abstract will not manifest unless there's something to hold it. But now he's going to take it deeper. The vessels are really even higher than the lights that are manifesting. You'd think the light is much greater. You can't have a light without a vessel. No. The vessels are actually higher than the light. That's why the lights are attracted to the vessels, because vessels are really higher than lights. That's his next point. The other reason, or the other way in which we can explain why they spoke about the action before the listening, which means the lights before the vessels before the lights. And why we can also say an ignorant person who is not doing mitzvahs, cannot be spiritual in the sense they cannot make that connection. Because the vessels are higher than the lights. And it's for that reason, not only because a light needs a vessel in order for it to come into a manifest state, but because the light is attracted to the vessel because the vessels have power over them. And it's for this reason that through them and with them, the light is drawn down through them. And that is because that has to do. See, the general idea of light and vessels that we explained till now, you can say Abraham wasn't lacking. Avraham wasn't lacking. We have physical vessels. He had spiritual vessels. His soul was a vessel. His love was a vessel. I mean, the main reason is this idea that he's going to explain now. There's something very, very potent about the physical world. And this is a concept that we learned many times, that there are sparks of holiness that are in the physical world, which come from the ancient world, the primordial world of chaos. And this was a very, very powerful world that collapsed. And shards from that world fell into the physical. All the mitzvahs that God gave us with physical substances, when we do them, we extract these sparks from that ancient world of Tohu. Those sparks are rooted higher than the lights that manifest. They come from a much higher place. And therefore, it's these very containers of the mitzvahs, the action itself that contains the physical material, which the physical material has within it, that spark that's from this primordial ancient world that was before this entire system. That's what can draw down the lights. And that's another reason why we need the lights more than the vessels. I'm sorry, we need the vessels in order to draw the lights. We know from the shattering of the vessels of the world of Tohu. And the 288 sparks. They are higher than the world of rectification. And we find that there's something. He shows an amazing thing. And you see it even in physical life, that things that have more relationship to the world of Tohu are more powerful. So the human being in general, we are sourced in the world of Tikkun. Primarily, our soul comes from the world of Tikkun, the world of rectification. Our bodies come from the world of Tohu. I know I'm just lazy and tired like crazy right now. So I want to take a shortcut and not explain this. But I don't have a choice, because whoever is on right now is watching, and you might not have come to the classes for 15 years and therefore heard this explanation 20 times. So I am going to go briefly over this idea. What is the idea of the shattering of the vessels? The idea is as follows. Initially, when God created the world, in order for light to come into this world, to create, the energy of God is simple and undefined. It needs to go through a process of attributes. But the Zohar speaks of, and there's sources, it's alluded to in the verses of Chumash itself, when it says the earth was chaos and chaotic, is that before the initial set of sphirot, of attributes, did not last. They shattered. Because every passing of energy through attributes involves, as we spoke, vessels, containers, and energy. The vessels and the containers were not, the energy and the containers were not commensurate with each other. The energies were way too intense for the vessels. It causes those vessels to shatter. When God saw that, he retracted those intense energies and he softened his projection. He gave a far more controlled, a far more lesser emanation. That's called the second order, the rectified order. The first one is called the world of chaos, where there was such an intense emanation that shattered the vessels. Then he re-emanated. The second emanation is radically, let's just say, incomparably weaker than the first emanation. It's filtered, it's weak. And the vessels that he emanated now were far broader vessels. So you had a change. The second order was different than the first order in two things. The first order had very intense lights and very, very, very undeveloped, unsophisticated vessels. So the two of them met and crashed. So now he created very sophisticated vessels and much more reduced light. He created the world through the second order. But the shards from that initial primordial world ended up kind of in the debris of that broken world, ended up being part of this world that we have now. Now, everything broken, shattered, messed up in this world comes from that broken debris. Everything normal and good and wonderful comes from the rectified world. And it's for that reason, for example, our souls are so perfect, they're so wonderful, they're great, because it comes from the rectified world. Our bodies are all over the place. Our bodies are uncontrollable. They have addictions and desires and wants and sometimes because they come from the shattered world where there was intense energy and they're shattered. They're broken. So that's why they're messed up. In general, Jew and non-Jew, the Jewish soul is from the rectified world. The non-Jewish soul, is from the shattered world. But precisely because of that, there's such potency and such potential in the Gentile world that isn't in the Jewish world. On a broader scale, human in general comes from the rectified world. Animals and plants are from the shattered, contain within them a lot of the shattered debris of the unholy world. The human has to elevate the rest of the world. The Jewish people have to elevate the rest of the world. The soul has to elevate the body. But when the soul elevates the body contributes to the soul what the soul doesn't have, because the body holds the secret of these shattered debris, of these sparks from that primordial world. And once we rectified, we can then draw back down the infinite lights that was initially emanated, and that's where life is really pumping. That's where you get the real deal. So we find an interesting thing. This even shows up this amazing idea. We see it literally in our physical lives. Why do humans live off animals? And why do humans live off plants? If a human is a higher form of a creature, it should be the opposite. Humans should be watering the plants, planting the plants, and sustaining the plants. But plants should not be contributed to humans because humans are higher. The answer is the plants are lower, but they're really much higher because they have sparks from this primordial world. So if this is in general in the physical world, that's the secret of mitzvahs. When God gave us commandments to do them in the physical, it's a means to collect these sparks of holiness, rectify them, elevate them through the human. But once they're elevated through the mitzvah, they open up channels of this infinite light to come down. And that's why the lights will only come down where the vessels are, because the vessels are from a much higher place than the lights, which are the lights of Tikkun, which are much lower. The lights from the second order are much lower than the lights of the first order. And that's the idea. And therefore, Adam Nizan Makabel Chayas, that is the reason why a person is sustained and receives life from the inanimate vegetable and animal. Even though they're much lower than him. They come from the world of chaos. When they fell down much lower. And we find this example when a building collapses. God forbid in Turkey when they had this earthquake. A lot of buildings collapsed. When the buildings collapse, you find that the stones that are very close to the site of the collapse are probably from the bottom of the building, the lower part. The stones that fall far away are from the top of the building. Because when it falls, the higher the stone is, the farther it falls. So the same is also, the higher the sparks of holiness, the farther away from holiness they fall. So even though they were once so holy, and therefore in the world they manifest as the most anti-godly element. So first of all, things that are just far away from spirituality, the more material something is, the less soul you see in something, the more material it is, it really has a higher source. So plants are more material than animals, and animals are more material than human. But precisely because of that, they have something greater. And that in the world itself, where there is more klipa, where there's more unholiness, you should know it's hiding a very, very deep spark. By way of analogy, if a stone falls from a wall, from the higher position it was within the building, it falls farther away. And now, all the mitzvot that God gives us, the action mitzvahs, they're all performed with things, with the substances of things that were in the shadow of the vessels. Like the mitzvah of tithing or giving to the Kohen. They're all done from you use vegetation, you use your wheat, you use your wine, you use all the stuff that comes from plants. Plant life is what you do all the agricultural mitzvahs with. And then sacrifices are all with animal. And even prayer, which kind of is like a human mitzvah, you're not taking any substances of the world. The Talmud Torah and Torah study, which is the greatest mitzvah, you still need to use physical speech, and physical speech comes from the body, which the body is from this, also contains within it sparks from this. Biur hu gashmi, speech is physical. And also more than that, in order to talk, right before I gave this class, I ate a cookie. Why? I needed energy. Not the best thing to get energy. Probably I could have gotten energy from something else, but the cookie was enticing to me right then, and that was what was most available. So what happened to the cookie? The cookie somehow is turning into these words that we're reading now, because by now I'm sure some of that energy is released into what we're learning. So the speech of Torah comes from the food that we eat. And it's taken from the energy that you've eaten and you've been sustained by. And therefore, Tikkun Hakaylim. So when you're doing this, you're fixing the vessels that broke, and extracting the 288. Now, even though the 288 seems to be a very small number, but the 288 later crumble into billions of sparks. And the cookie that I ate had one of those sparks. And so is with everything you eat. Everything you wear, everything you have in your physical life are all have little tiny sparks. And when you're using them in accordance to how the Torah tells you to use them, you're retrieving the spark and bringing it back into the 248 limbs of the king. You're bringing it into the Ze'er Anpin, which is from the world of Tikkun. This is what stimulates the lights to come down into the Tikkun, into the rectified structure. Now, why would these lights get so excited about these sparks? Because these sparks come from a world that are higher than these lights, come from the primordial energy. So the lights that we're talking about are the lights from the second order. They're still godly, but they're attracted because they see a spark. They go down, they want to manifest in it. And therefore, the root of these vessels that are from the world of Tohu, they are higher in their root, more from the light. They were lowered to be vessels. That's why, even though now they fell into something lower, it's with them and through them. Nimshach or is where the light is drawn. Just like you see that food from lower forms of life add energy to the human. You eat, you feel stronger. So too, the spiritual human above is fed by something that is lower than him. which is the physical items. We actually contribute to the supernal man above through integrating these sparks of holiness and feeding them into the vessels of Atzilut, the west vessels above. It's almost like we're feeding God, so to speak, the supernal man above. And that's what draws this powerful lights from Toyu to manifest. Because in its root, it comes from a higher place. And that's where Abraham was lacking. Because since his mitzvahs did not engage the physical world, he didn't have this potent, powerful sparks. So that's what we said in the beginning of the class today. He was able to attract to the Orin Sofa Sove, but a much weaker trickle. Avram fulfilled all of Torah. He managed to draw the lights. That's drawn through the mitzvahs. Avram was able to do that through a more spiritual form of an exercise. But his soul was racing outward and returning, and all this that we discussed earlier. But the vessels that are brought about through the actual mitzvahs, this definitely Abraham couldn't do. Avram couldn't do them. The Torah was not yet translated into a physical formula, into the world. Into action. And if he would have even done them, it wouldn't have any meaning. Because until God did not activate it, it didn't have any, it wasn't possible to do them. And since in their root, B'shoresh, in the root, the rectification of the vessels are higher, to fulfilling the Torah and mitzvahs in the actual, it's much higher than Abraham's performance, from what Avraham fulfilled. The physical mitzvahs are higher than the spiritual mitzvahs of Abraham. Once we understand this, that the whole work over here is Tikkun Hakaylim, the rectification of the vessels, we understand how the giving of the Torah is much higher than Avraham. And then we understand that we're going to, as we said in the beginning, I said that by the giving of the Torah, it was only the beginning of the rectification of the vessels. But by the story of Purim was the completion of it. That's why by Purim we completed receiving the Torah. And for that, they had to bring out the horses. And the garment, like we said, that's the story of Haman, and that's the next piece, which he's going to explain. But we're going to leave that for next week, Thursday. It's going to be run over Purim, and you're going to get that, Be'ezras Hashem, in next class. Hopefully this will all open up for me until next week, Thursday night, and we shall get the rest of this amazing discourse. Everyone should have a very happy Purim. And Mashiach should be here now.